Working Fans Podcast. Cool.
Yep.
All right, here we go. Coming down 3, 2.
Welcome back for another week of the Working Fans Podcast. This is AJ. I'm the former wrestler. We've got Dave, the ultimate fan, here with us. As we do every week, our producer Joe likes to make us sound good and makes us look way more professional than we actually are. As always, you can find us on Twitter, that's @FansWorking, Facebook, Working Fans Pod. We've got email where you can reach out to us and please contact us to let us know what you think of the podcast and for any ideas that you might have. That's workingfanswrestlingpod@gmail.com. We're on Instagram where you can keep up with us at workingfanswrestling_pod. And then you can now listen to us on all major platforms, including Anchor.fm. We're on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Apple Podcasts, and you can actually check us out on YouTube. Now, it's important when you go onto the Apple Podcasts and YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a rating, let us know what you think so you can help us out and we can continue to do what we love and bring you guys in as fans.
All right, everybody, it's the Working Fan Podcast with the man they call Dave and AJ Strangebrew. Today, it's Dave versus AJ.
It's going to be a little different.
Sort of. So we had this concept. I came up with the idea of the Von Erichs versus the Harts. Who was the best wrestling family?
In fairness, most of the Von Erichs are dead before any of the Harts were famous.
And Scott, loyal listener, had pointed out some of that stuff and said, is it really a fair comparison when you break it down?
Well, you're also comparing one cable station in the 1980s to a worldwide phenomenon of the WWE in the 1990s and 2000s and beyond.
Yes, and Zach also said that too. He brought up the exposure and stuff you talk about. So to get those two guys who gave me the most input this week, and I'm not going to go into detail and read it like I normally would because we're recording this video. We don't know if it'll make it, but we'll see. We're going to find out. So I'm not able to look at my notes, but they gave me basically the most input was Zach St. John and Scott from Voluntown. And that's the thing we came up with was like, we love both these guys, both these families. There's a lot of tragedy, and there's some members of this family we might not like. We're going to talk about that.
We really love the Von Erichs.
We do.
Thank you for that interview, Ross and Marshall.
Yes, those guys are great.
Still waiting to hear from you, David. Hart Smith, David Hart Smith.
Yeah.
I wasn't making a sick joke there.
No. Heaven needed a champion.
Don't start. I get choked up still hearing that.
So we decided to make this a discussion because it was like something like 10 votes for the Harts and maybe 1 or 2 for the Von Erichs.
In fairness,
and one guy fucking had the nerve to say the Von Erichs, but only because of Lance.
How?
Kiss my ass.
First of all, everybody knows Lance not really a real Von Erich, and that was not the best years of the Von Erichs.
Was that around the same time that Fritz faked that heart attack?
No, Fritz faked the heart attack beforehand.
He did before that, yeah. So, who was more likely to win Parent of the Year?
Well,
Stu or Fritz?
I was going to say, let's start off with the parents.
Let's start. Nothing wrong with Helen. She threw the towel in. She's a good woman.
Both of them had their own organizations, obviously. You have Stampede.
Yeah.
Now, this is something we can do.
Yeah.
Stampede versus World Class.
Now, that's interesting. We obviously, back in the cable era, got World Class a little more because they had the ESPN deal.
World Class was on ESPN, and they were one of the first ones to use music, to really use cameras around the ring so you could get different angles.
Innovative.
Stampede was your old-fashioned, almost like wrestling from the Garden, where they used the one hard cam. And while they had good wrestling there, I don't think Saskatchewan, Canada, which has a much lower population and being in that television market, compares anywhere near to the global outreach that.
And we did learn years later that World Class was huge in Israel. They had a deal there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now,
I like to pitch Fritz spinning a dreidel.
Stu actually trained Fritz.
He did.
Yeah.
And both of them were tremendous amateur athletes. Fritz being a football player who then went into wrestling. He, oddly enough, wrestled as a Nazi sympathizer early in his career, which is incredible how popular they've become in Israel.
Sure.
That start. However,
It was mostly the Von Erich boys at that time that got over.
well, I was going to say his real name is Atkinson,
Sure.
and he was not even German, much less
No.
Nazi sympathizer. Whereas Fritz basically was always your very similar
Stu.
Stu was very similar to Vern in the sense that he was that all-American wrestler,
Yes.
all-Canadian wrestler, and
No nonsense.
no nonsense, like the legitimacy of the sport.
Yeah.
Reminds me a lot of Cowboy Bill Watts.
Sure.
Or the Vern Gagnes of wrestling.
Yeah, and the thing with Stu, the only thing I would say negative about Stu is he did, and AJ probably wouldn't find it negative, had a perverse love of stretching people and making them tap out.
I don't understand why that's a negative. Everybody needs a stretching.
Yes. Of course, both these families had tragedies.
Both have had more than their share of tragedies.
Yeah. I mean,
now, how much is that due to family pressure? How much of that is due to the lifestyle of being on the road as a professional wrestler?
Well, clearly with the Von Erichs, a lot of it was.
Yeah, I mean, well...
But the biggest tragedy with the Hart family had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
By all intents and purposes, everything we ever heard about Owen was that he was a role model for a member of the pro wrestling family. And Owen died because...
No, wait a minute.
Faulty equipment.
Yeah, but still at the hands of wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
It's still a tragedy because of wrestling.
It
Now,
is. Very much so.
Jim Neidhart, obviously, we have a history of drugs and being released from the WWE because of drugs. And now, by all accounts, later in life, he had cleaned up his life and died tragically because of just wear and tear on the body at that point.
Yeah.
Davey Boy Smith, allegedly, was also known to partake and party. And when you die before the age of 40 and you're in that kind of shape, typically your heart doesn't give out without some kind of substance causing it to.
Yeah, and then, I mean... Obviously, the same things could be said like with Kerry, and then...
Well, Kerry got caught with the drugs. He was on trial for drugs.
Yeah, and then committed
suicide by shooting himself in the stomach. Which, by the way, is there a more painful way to kill yourself than to shoot yourself in the stomach and then just lay there and die?
No. So who was... Actually, I already know the answer to this. Your favorite Von Erich was Kevin.
My favorite's Kevin.
Your favorite Hart was Owen.
Also lasted the longest. My favorite Hart... Other than Bruce?
Fuck out of here. We don't give a fuck about that jobber Bruce Hart. We learned later was really a con man. You respected Brett.
Teddy.
Fuck out of here with Teddy. No, Teddy had a lot of talent.
No, he did. And he still does.
Still does.
And he still can't get out of his own fucking way.
Yeah.
Pardon the French.
Yeah.
But Owen, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I know you're a Brett guy. I know that.
I am, but...
It doesn't mean you don't appreciate
I love and appreciate Owen. Owen... could do no wrong. Actually, Zach sent me a text a while back talking about how we should have had Owen in our top heels. He was an underrated heel.
Absolutely.
He was great. And it's true. I never didn't like Owen. And
Well,
Owen was the first time when Owen became a heel, I was happy for him because I knew he was going to get a push.
And it's hard for us to actually debate him as a heel because we're two of the people who liked him constantly. A lot of the people that you'll hear talk about him beloved now booed against him when he was actually the heel. And
it was actually in Brett's book that jobber Bruce we find out he talks about who tried to get Owen's push and come back as the heel. And Bruce hadn't wrestled for years and Brett said, no, we'll do this angle, but it'll be with Owen.
Well, me and Dave have been friends for a long time, and we were friends WrestleMania 10 when Brett wrestled Owen.
Yeah.
And as you know, unlike yourself, I cheered for Owen.
Yes. I wasn't as upset, though, at the time. I really liked Owen. What I remember being worried about, I was worried that Brett, because not many people his size were still holding belts at that time, I thought Brett might get squashed by Yoko later. And when Brett won the belt, I was super excited because now I know we're going to get Brett versus Owen.
And I knew, and this was before I trained to wrestle, so this is before I had inside baseball. But I knew when Brett lost earlier in the night, just from being a wrestling fan for so long, I knew something good had to happen at the end of the night for him.
It made sense.
Yeah.
I was more emotionally invested at that point.
Which I had no emotional investment.
No.
I was actually cheering for Lex Luger.
Which you liked Luger, although we both know back at that time, by the time Luger got to WF, at the time, he was not as good.
I didn't cheer for Luger because I was a big Luger fan. I cheered for Luger because the idea of the guy from NWA, WCW going over in the WWF meant that much to me.
I was happy for you.
Yeah.
Although I think you were happy that Perfect came back as the referee.
I was.
Yeah, I know I was too.
Yeah, but as we've talked about before, I still believe Perfect was better than Brett.
Those are on. That might be. No, that's we just that's out there. It's out there. Yeah. Okay.
You can check out that debate, and if you agree with Dave, whatever.
The thing is with the Von Erich boys, though, is we don't know how good David could have been. You know, David, by all intents and purposes, like Zach and Scott were talking about this too, he could have been the world heavyweight champion. And that could have changed his ball game around.
Well, now, wait a minute. It's not just by hearsay.
Right.
Almost everybody around in that time period, including Ric Flair, who had the belt.
Yes.
And Harley Race.
Harley, too. Right.
Both have said that David would have gotten a push probably before Flair had gotten another push.
Yeah.
And the reason why was because that's how good World Class Wrestling had started doing with their TV shows and because of the ability. What a lot of people didn't see from David Von Erich was he had been the babyface, obviously, in the Dallas territory. When he went to Florida and wrestled against Dusty Rhodes, wrestled throughout Florida.
You're reading my mind.
He actually wrestled as a heel.
He did, yes.
And actually did an outstanding job as a heel.
Yeah.
And he showed that he can work both ways.
Which
is important going through territory to territory.
And one of the reasons why I think a lot of people might have gave the nod to the Hart family.
By the way, David, another thing working in his cap, 6'7".
Right. Yes. And here's the thing, and could move too.
So now, he could have even worked up north.
Now, the thing I would say the Harts had going for them is because you're right, David had that small run as a heel.
Yeah.
But Kevin and Kerry, not so much. Whereas Brett and Owen showed they both could be heels. Well, we'll say this about Brett. Whether you like Brett or not, I think we both agree. Yeah. Brett's hottest and best run was that
Championship Wrestling.
Get the fuck out of here. That anti-America, we love you in Canada still run. Which, at that point, WWE hadn't quite turned the tide ratings-wise, but creatively.
I don't think the WWE pulled the trigger enough on that.
They were about ready to start an international war almost here. People were getting hot back then.
Well, even look at after the frickin' Survivor Series, after you had the Screwjacks in Montreal, you would go to Montreal after that in Canadian provinces.
Years after.
For years.
Yes.
And you couldn't get a babyface in the WWE cheered for. They would automatically go for whoever the heels were at that time period.
Yes.
Because they were that anti-anything the WWE was going to...
Forget about Shawn Michaels.
Oh, God.
Who was beloved everywhere else.
Shawn Michaels still gets booed in Montreal.
Still once in a while. Forget about the Hebners.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
But I think their heel work, the Harts, and their ability to be heels and face, and the national exposure they would get years later really was what gave them the nod.
Now, both families obviously have had trouble with the pressures. And we talked about some of the people trying to live up to it and some of the darker sides. Obviously, the drugs.
Sure.
When you're that young and everything's pushed upon you and all of a sudden you're a superstar not only on TV but in the...
If you keep that with the brothers, that was a bigger issue with the Von Erichs. When you start going to the extended family of the Harts and maybe the other brother we don't know, that's when it gets a little dicey.
Now, for the Von Erichs, what people don't realize is not only were they huge on that platform... But they were literally mobbed every time they went to the ring.
Sure.
If you watch that old footage,
it's great.
Their ring jackets are torn off them.
Kevin Von Erich, I think, is making out at one point. It was a wild time. Jerry Gordy, as we know, knocked down a fan on his ass at one point.
And they were going against guys where there was legitimate heat. Gino Hernandez,
the Freebirds.
When they thought that the Von Erichs were legitimately injured, even when Fritz did that horrible heart attack angle that you talked about earlier, people genuinely were worried. You're talking about people wanting to go to the hospital and make sure Fritz is all right. Oh my God, the patriarch of the Von Erich family could die on us here, and we all saw it. Not to mention, if you remember, that attendance for that event was through the roof. You're talking about Dallas Stadium being packed to the gills.
Drew a lot of money in a different time period. And we talk about believability in that Texas area, and this and that to do with the Von Erichs, but Gino Hernandez, who died, people were calling the police and telling them to look into Chris Adams, who he was feuding with, because he had blinded Chris Adams in an angle.
You got to check out this guy.
Yeah, look into this.
He had something to do with this.
It's just amazing.
You didn't see something like that again until the Rey Mysterio lawn dart in Orlando.
That's true. This is
when all of a sudden the people watching the telecast in Orlando are calling up the police as if my hand's a phone.
But, you know, one thing with the Von Erichs, though, you do have to say, is the potential for that legacy to live on is still very great. Ross and Marshall and MLW, we don't know what's going to happen with their careers. Hopefully, they seem like they're not going to have the personal tragedies, at least.
For some reason, I thought I read about another Von Erich.
Not Lance.
No. For some reason, I thought that there was another one coming up.
There is the son of Lance Von Erich.
Yeah.
Rip Von Erich.
We kid. No, Ross and Marshall clearly have a bright future. They look phenomenal athletes, take very much after their father.
And they did our show.
Who was the best Von Erich. They're clearly geniuses when it comes to promotion.
Yes.
Doing the Working Fans podcast.
They did our show.
Yes.
But at the end
Whereas the Harts, clearly not quite as smart.
No.
Not a single one of them has returned a phone call, an email, a text message. Brett, where are you?
So despite this overwhelming support for the Harts.
Let's count this.
There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 to 2 and one clown.
11 to 2.
Yeah. So this should be a clear win. However, since the Von Erichs did our show, an upset,
the
baby.
Von Erichs win.
Ross and Marshall, this is for you guys.
You heard it from the Working Fans podcast. The greatest family out of these two, the Von Erichs.
The Von Erich boys.
We'll talk to you down the road.
It's the porno music.
All right, Working Fans, welcome back for another week of the 531 when we actually hit record. This is where we take our top 5 list on a particular subject, debate it down to a top 3 list, and from that top 3, we pick the number 1. This week, it is the top 5 pay-per-views that changed the industry. And this is a list, this is the first time my brother's given me a list. First time I've asked him for one, so we definitely got to include him more because this is a very interesting subject. And the list that he gave me includes Royal Rumble 98, Wrestle Kingdom 11, Over the Edge 99, King of the Ring 98, and WrestleMania 1. He included Wrestle Kingdom 11 because of the 1-hour Okada match with Omega.
That Over the Edge 99, was that the one where Owen died?
Let me check. Yeah, that is actually the one where he died.
Yeah, crazy story. Jake St. John, listener of the show, contributor, he had a story about that. So he was in his room, drunk and high as fuck, and Zach St. John comes in the room, his brother, says, Jake, did you hear what happened to Owen? And Jake's trying to fake Zach out. It's like, no, what happened? And Zach's like, well, he's dead. And Jake is like, is he hurt? And Zach's like, yeah, Jake, he's dead. So, anyway, a little story from Family Time with the St. John's, which segues into friend of the St. John's, Mike Flynn, gave us a list. And on that list is WrestleMania 1, the original. Kind of hard to argue that is probably the most instrumental pay-per-view in all pay-per-views. Or even just wrestling, maybe even beyond. Bash to the Beach 96, come on, NWO. That is kind of really the main, I'd argue the biggest storyline in wrestling history. All in, huge pay-per-view, sets the tone for a lot of the wrestling we're seeing right now, and we might even still not know the historical effects of all this. Takeover 1, maybe you won't see this a lot on the list, but I really enjoyed the fact to put Takeover 1 on here. And Mania 17, which he said thought it helped introduce a lot of new talent, get them over. Rock and Austin were at a peak here, and this was also a very big buy rate for WWE at the time.
It's wild to see how many of those people from that first takeover are with the company now, because it's not many. And at the time, that was like their next group of rising stars.
Owens debuted on that, if I remember right. He's in the Powerbomb Sami Zayn after...
that is a different TakeOver. TakeOver Arrival was like Bo Dallas.
Okay.
And I want to say like Tyson Kidd was on that. Sami Zayn.
They had Natalia versus Charlotte because Brett and Flair were in the corners. I remember that.
Yep. Yeah, that was when NXT was just like really starting to come into its own on the early end of things, and it's only gotten bigger from there.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'll bring you my list next, just to switch things up again. Number one on my list, I had the When Worlds Collide pay-per-view that popped up a lot on the WCW one. And I think that was just big that a pay-per-view featuring that much Mexican talent got that big in the U.S. I included WrestleMania 3 because Hogan and Andre... I mean, WrestleMania 1's big because that's where the real gamble came from. And McMahon putting it all on the line, but Hogan Andre, you can't get much bigger than that.
Brought the house.
All In was my third pick because of obviously the Bucks being able to strike out on their own and show that they can fill an arena like that. I chose Wrestle Kingdom 9 for my number 4. And I chose that card because that's the first one that ended up on American pay-per-view. Jeff Jarrett basically became a member of the Bullet Club to distribute that through Global Force Wrestling somehow to American pay-per-views. So just the fact that was at the head of the New Japan resurgence was why I put it on there. And then obviously you got to have Bash at the Beach 96 because obviously I couldn't figure out a fifth one, so I had to steal from somebody's list.
It's a good one to steal. Probably the biggest WCW pay-per-view of all time. All right, so continuing with St. John's, that, much like Mike Flynn, has his first two picks are Mania 1 and Bash at the Beach 96. Then he has Mania 3, also like you had, really big one. All In, much like you and Mike had. And then Zach threw in ECW Barely Legal 97, which I believe was ECW's first pay-per-view.
Yep, that will definitely pop up on a few lists. Now, I've got a list from William Merriweather from the Rockin' Randy's Rockin' Wrestling Group. And he had Starrcade, gonna assume 83. He had WrestleMania 2, WrestleMania 3, Bash at the Beach 96, and Survivor Series 97. Now, what's interesting to me is that WrestleMania 2, because 1, it's obviously the big gamble. 3, it's Hogan Andre. Is 2 just the fact that they did it again? I mean, that had was that the Piper boxing match?
Yeah, it was in 3 locations. It was kind of a failure by a lot of people's standards because it didn't have the same buzz as Mania 1, and they struggled with the feed and trying to pull this off in 3 different locations and stuff.
Yeah, they almost tried to outbig themselves with that one.
You had the Piper boxing match with T. That was the main event of one of the areas. And then the other main event, I believe in Chicago, was Battle Royal with the wrestlers, football players / wrestlers. And then the final main event was in LA, which was Hogan and Bundy in the cage.
I mean, now that we talk it over, it's not a bad pick because it is in true Vince McMahon fashion trying to go big. And even though McMahon scaled it back, I almost feel like he was testing how big he could get. And then when that proved to not be the best idea, it's like, well, why don't we just scale it back a little bit?
Put Vince over, criticize him wherever fence you fall on. Ain't nobody going to say this motherfucker is afraid to take chances, though. Huh? Like, talk about, he definitely wanted to go big.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Who do you got a list from next?
Our boy Scott, who made sure to tell us it was Starrcade 83, Mania 1, All In, Very Legal 97, and Bash at the Beach 96. So a lot of familiar lists right there.
Yes, sir. Next up, we got Kevin Dignam from Rockin' Randy's Rockin' Wrestling Group. He has WrestleMania 3, Bash at the Beach 96, WrestleMania 13, Survivor Series 91, and Royal Rumble 92. Now, what would have happened at 13, do you think, that would have made it industry changing? Because I can't think of that offhand.
I don't know about industry changing, but it did have probably considered one of the best matches in WrestleMania history. One Jim Cornette actually called the best NWA style match he's ever seen in WWE at WrestleMania 13, and that was Bret Hart, Steve Austin in a submission match, which was more like a street fight, but it ended up as a submission match with Ken Shamrock as the ref. It also had the double turn.
Okay, the double turn, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Survivors.
That was the main event. The main event was Undertaker beating Sid, which Sid shit his pants. Which, a lot of people have said over the years, he shit his pants. But, I think most people recognize that submission match is the best part of that WrestleMania.
Maybe, would you think the start of the Attitude Era or around the start?
You could definitely argue that. It wasn't the turn. I mean, the turn was definitely going to be the following year, even slightly after Mania. You can almost argue the next day or week after where Austin McMahon feud really started cooking. But, they were definitely starting to get edgier at that time for sure.
Yeah. Obviously, Royal Rumble 92, Flair, best Rumble ever.
You're not going to find any arguments with me of that. I think that is the MVP performance, and I love that Rumble.
Who do you got next?
Well, I got no one except for myself. You want me to read what I got here?
Yeah, you're coming in a little hot on that mic.
Oh, sorry, baby girl. That's what I do. Always coming in hot. All right, I got to start off with Mania 3 because, again, Hogan Andre, it threw the house. It's the biggest gate of all time as far as I know. And
yeah.
If it's not the biggest gate of all time, when you take in the time period they had it, it's probably the biggest gate of all time. Mania 1, because it's the original. Starrcade 83, because, you know what? We still have Starrcade to this day. Even if it just turned into a house show right now, we still have that pay-per-view. So I think that shows you how influential that was.
I should have had Starrcade 83. I want to be on the record about that.
And then I tried to be a little different. Bash of the Beach 96 is my last one, but I was a little different with 4. I went with Mania 30 because it was the first WrestleMania that was on the WWE Network. And I thought to myself, that's kind of an historic deal. That was the day the Undertaker streak ended, and that was also Daniel Bryan winning the world title to close out WrestleMania. And it was the first time, we had anything airing on the network. So I think that's a pretty huge deal.
That is pretty good. Next up, Craig Hallett came at us with the list, and he has the Super J Cup. I'm going to assume 94 on there. Another one I'm mad I didn't include because you got Liger, Benoit, I believe Sasuke was on that. All the great light heavyweights of the time just going nuts. You got WrestleMania 2 on his list. He has Great American Bash. Not sure which one. Starrcade, which, again, I'm going to assume 83. And if we're going to assume the first pay-per-view, if they don't put a year after it, what was the first Great American Bash? Was that a War Games?
Oh, man, it's funny. I thought about this today, and I had trouble with that because the first Great American Bash I remember was kind of like a tour, and they were torn. But they did tour with the War Games, as you mentioned it. So, and that was the first one, obviously, where J.J. Dillon got his shoulder separated, too.
Yep. Great American Bash, even if you look at it as an event, that was one of those, that was probably, would you say, Dusty at his biggest, trying to make this a country music thing with wrestling as a tour, had Waylon Jennings on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you think about it, Dusty and Vince had a lot of similarities in certain ways. Obviously, Dusty liked to keep it more on the wrestling aspect, but boy, Dusty could put on a big show and be a big promoter and flamboyant and had big ideas himself, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Now, Ryan Damon comes at us with the next list. He's got WrestleMania, WrestleMania 3, and then it just says SummerSlam, Royal Rumble, Barely Legal. I'm assuming these aren't his favorite magazines, and I don't know which SummerSlam he's counting.
Maybe he just means the original.
That's true. I mean, if you want to go Royal Rumble, you go that first Rumble. That was the first time that Vince counteracted something with something free on TV. And then, like you said, Barely Legal 97 was that first ECW pay-per-view.
I love the first Royal Rumble. As a kid, I still have fond memories of that because I never knew what we were actually getting. I remember watching it, and I didn't understand the concept. And then I started watching this thing where people just kept running in and out. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. So,
Yeah.
The first Royal Rumble has fond memories of me, even though it was a TV special, as you said.
Yep. Next up, we got loyal listener to the show, Jesse from New Hampshire. He's got WrestleMania 1, WrestleMania 17, Jesus, Bash at the Beach 96, Starrcade 83, All In, and then he's got, as an honorable mention, Barely Legal 97.
Some good weed over here.
Randy Osga, loyal listener to the show. His list includes I agree with Jesse, so that saves up. And I gotta ask, Randy seems like a cheese pizza type guy.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if he's okay if the cheese is burnt, or like when he gets a vanilla shake, if it's double vanilla, is that cool or is that getting too spicy? Randy, we need to know these things.
Yeah, you have to ask him. I'm sure Randy slip in Joe's DM for that and let him know what's up.
Chris
Zauha, double vanilla steak.
Always gonna be Zoucha to me. Is he has WrestleMania 3, Survivor Series 97, WrestleMania 14, Bash at the Beach 96, and Barely Legal 97.
Yeah, it's the second time that Survivor Series 97 made a list, I should say.
Yeah, what was on the Survivor Series 97?
That was the infamous Montreal Screwjob.
Oh, Jesus.
That's where Bret Hart got stuck.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah. So, I mean, in retrospect, too, I mean, it was very interesting because we knew Bret was leaving for WCW. And, like, what a wow. We knew, and this, like, we have a future, obviously, list we're going to be talking about, future episodes for 531 is top feuds. And you'll see Bret and Michaels make that list a few times. And I got to say, like, that pay-per-view and Bret and IHBK, one thing about that time period, and I can see why it resonated with that pay-per-view, a lot of unpredictability because the lines definitely got blurred by then. And I don't think the lines have ever been blurred quite as well since Bret and HBK because of how authentic it was back then.
Very true. Now, Benji Fido has a list. And
I love that name.
He's got WrestleMania 3, and then I wrote down Survivor Series 87, but I feel like it was 97 with the amount of votes that 97 has been getting.
Survivor Series 87 was the original, so who knows?
Okay, yeah, maybe. I didn't really double check these before we started recording, so it very well could be. King of the Ring 98 is his third choice, and then he only gave us 4, and he rounded it out with SummerSlam 92.
Interesting. SummerSlam 92 was Wembley Stadium. That was Bret Hart and the Bulldogs. Famously, Bret, I'm fucked. I broke crack all night. Mr. Hitman. And King of the Ring 98 makes it a second time, too. That is, by the way, if you're not remembering that one, is where Undertaker threw Mick Foley off the cell, and he was broken in half.
I actually knew that because when my brother sent me his list, he had originally sent me Wrestle Kingdom 14, which I'm like, that was this year. And he said the one with the Okada-Omega match. So I'm like, all right, I think that's 11. And then I instantly messaged him back, did you mean King of the Ring 96 and not 98? And he goes, nah, 98, Hell in the Cell. And then I actually had to look it up, and I'm like, oh, wow, how'd that make it past me? So, favorite of the show, Josh Dunn, got back to us at the 11th hour. And his list is Bash at the Beach 96, WrestlePalooza 98, WrestleMania 6, Money in the Bank 2011, and then he has All Out. I don't know if he meant all. I don't know if that was All In. I could have fucked that up.
Interesting list, nonetheless. Mania 6, one of the famous memes in the history of wrestling we see to this day. Hulk Hogan versus Ultimate Warrior, chest to strength. Hogan, bow to the Warrior, brother.
And even though AJ is not here with us in person this week, he is in here. He's here with us in spirit, and we're giving him the main event spot. He's got WrestleMania 12, When Worlds Collide, Bash at the Beach 96, WrestleMania 3, And I feel like we stole his thunder for this one, but Over the Edge 99 rounds out his top 5.
Yeah, okay. Interesting list. Well, what do you got here? Who's coming up the most on here? Obviously, Mania 3 and 1 and Bash at the Beach 96.
If we're going to pick between Mania 3 and 1, who do you want to give it to? We've already laid out the case for it. 1 was the big gamble. 3 was that industry-changing main event. I'm going to give it to 3 just because, yeah, it's worth it to have that gamble, but then 3 is that gamble starting to pay off and being one of the bigger events they put on there.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. They're probably going to have a hard time convincing me 3 wasn't the biggest pay-per-view ever. But let's continue on. 3 makes the list.
All right, we got, you said Bash at the Beach 96 on a lot of lists.
Sure.
Let's put Bash at the Beach 96 up against Starrcade 83, because 83 popped up on a few lists.
You know what? Starrcade 83, that's the start of NWA wrestling. And boy, I look at that fondly, and those are some of my favorite memories.
We also know how you don't think that Flair Harley feud is shit, though.
No. I want to correct that. I didn't like that match at Starrcade 83. Flair Harley could fucking go. Fucking dumbass Gene Kaninsky, who was probably drunk, stumbled all over the ring, screwed up that match. AJ agrees with me. We know what we're talking about.
Don't you sully the good goddamn name of Gene Kaninsky.
He ain't shit. Listen, anyway, but that being said, there's no argument with the numbers. Bash at the Beach 96, WCW, that's the most influential time in NWA/WCW history. That is the start of the NWO angle. It gets no bigger.
All right, so we got Starrcade 83, WrestleMania 3.
Starrcade 83. I said Bash at the Beach 96.
Oh, did you? Shit.
That's what I'm saying. Smoke another one, you jabroni.
Oh, that's why we shouldn't do this when I'm hungry, because we're all over the place.
Motherfucker's thinking about a sausage sandwich. I'm here trying to
Also, email us if we forgot your list this week, because I feel like we left somebody out. Ooh. It's going to be hard for this last one, because...
I don't know. ECW Barely Legal 97 made quite a few lists.
That's what I was looking at. Let's put Barely Legal 97 on there, because their first pay-per-view, that's a big move.
Yeah.
And I think...
Eric Bischoff said that ECW was not even a pimple on a hamster's ass for the game.
Oh, somebody listened to this week's 83 Weeks featuring TNA Hard Justice 2010.
Yeah, I believe so.
All right, so now it's not too hard to figure out who's going to be the first one gone in true 5-3-1 fashion.
Unfortunately, yes. The ECW, what is that? Now, it's an awesome brand. I'm not Eric Bischoff, but before we fucking say that, I'm, quoting Eric here. But when you put it in the big scheme of things, it's definitely not as big as the other two pay-per-views.
Yeah, it's not as big as Bash at the Beach 96 or, like we talked about, WrestleMania 3. Yeah. So now...
I gotta go Mania 3, man.
What's that?
I gotta go Mania 3. It's the golden era. It's the biggest match of all time. I'm sorry.
I was gonna see if there was any debate to it, but there really isn't. I mean, both featured Hulk Hogan.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, Hogan can only be so big at the end of his career, I think. When you see him in WrestleMania 3, that's when he's at, like, the height of... Or starting to be at the height of his Hulkamania.
Yeah, pinnacle. Absolutely.
And Dave, you know what the music means. That means we have picked a top pay-per-view that has changed the industry. And I don't think it's a surprise to many people that it is WrestleMania 3 put on by the McMahon Dynasty. As always, get a hold of us on Twitter at FansWorking, Working Fans Wrestling Podcast. Is that the Facebook page name? I'm pretty sure. We're up to almost 1,000 people, so don't worry about the name. Just search Working Fans Podcast. WorkingFansPodcast.com. I botched that almost as bad as AJ. We'll see you guys next week.
As Tracy Smothers says, you got to have a job to support your wrestling habit, you know?
Sure.
This is Jay Steele, and you're listening to the Working Fans Podcast. Don't get worked.
All right, everybody. It's the Working Fans Podcast with the man they call Dave, AJ Strange Brew, and today we have a special guest on. This gentleman has worked for promotions such as TNA, Ring of Honor, WWE. He's even trained a lot of wrestlers you might know, Colt Cabana, CM Punk, one of the all-time greats. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ace Steel. Ace, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing awesome. I'm upright and not on the ground, so you can't complain about that.
Absolutely. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was right from the get-go, like who influenced like your style of wrestling? I mean, I know, tell us a little about like who trained you and stuff, because you had some really good trainers from what I saw.
So the trainers that, say, if you go on the Wikipedia site and see, are the people that I've, come in contact with over the years. The initial training started at Windy City Wrestling in Chicago, which at the time was on Sports Channel, which Sports Channel was, it was big shit back then. For a kid out of high school, I'm like, where do I go? And I turned on Sports Channel on Friday nights, and man, there's this wrestling TV show when wrestling was hot, like in the 80s, And we're talking to Windy City Wrestling, where Paul Heyman booked for, I don't know how long he really booked there, but he booked for a short time. He'd be responsible for the Bam Bam Bigelow versus Terry Gordy match, the Battle of the Bam Bams, bringing Brody in, like stuff like that. And of course, the original Midnight. So it was, when you look at it, just being Chicago-based, it was pretty top-notch. And they'd run the International Amphitheater, which was going back to the old days of wrestling in Chicago. So the guy by the name of Sam DeCero ran the promotion. He was just a local guy that worked with the tag partner Eli the Eliminator, who you might remember as, he was Eli the Eliminator in Texas for World Class. Yeah. They worked for Dick the Bruiser, so it kind of spawned off Dick the Bruiser, and that's where this guy came from. And then he had what I've come to find out when I just think about it, is like he just had a lot of enhancement guys that trained for him, which is what happens a lot, like you need the mechanics in there helping guys out. So that's where I started. Influence-wise, man, it was everything, because when I grew up and really started catching on, I love the Horsemen. I'm an NWA mark. Nice. I love everything NWA. You go back as far as to Georgia, as far back in time, anything I can watch that's incredible work. Or then Hart and Perfect, I get caught on that when I'm in high school. So, just all that type of stuff, whether that was exactly in my style or not, that's the type of wrestling I love. So, and then you even love the Freebirds. Like, I see the flamboyancy of guys. Like, how do you mix that all in, So, guys like that back in those days, like exactly, like old NWA Crockett. AWA I grew up on specifically, and there's a lot of characters in the AWA.
We're around the same age bracket. I'm 44, and this is AJ. And I grew up also on the NWA. I grew up on, obviously, Little World Class, being on ESPN, AWA. And when I went down to train, similar to what you did, you saw it on TV. I went down and wrestled for a few years, but I trained with Adrian Street. And the reason why I found Adrian to train with at Skull Crushers was because I was flipping through Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and in the back of the magazine there, you would have the different classified sections. So I went down and trained him. And I love Adrian to this day, but I should have went to Windy City, because you guys turned out some of the best wrestlers in that time period, to be honest with you, for the independents and beyond.
Oh, thank you. Well, his first bumps, Chris Daniels took with me, which is I just don't think about it. It's been so long, but for sure his first bumps, and probably, if he recalls, and probably not, because he's had so many matches by this point. But one of the first matches that he had to call in the ring was with me. I said, "We'll just call it out there." What do you mean? We're not. We'll talk about a couple things. Let's just go call it. I mean, that's always been my opinion. We train together. I know what you know. Let's just feel the people and go with it. And we had quite a crew. I mean, a lot of guys came out of there that moved on to Puerto Rico, had a little bit of fame. Didn't. Chris Daniels was the first independent superstar.
Well, what I saw from Windy City Wrestling, and this is just obviously my opinion, but you guys were ahead of the curve. What you set up was very similar to what we see in the independents today, where there is more matches with a higher skill level. Because when I was first breaking in, it was a lot of the WWE or old NWA guys trying to hold on for one more payday, which you can't blame them, obviously, but you would get booked in a match to enhance them, and that was basically the card. Whereas you guys had wonderful matches where you were seeing young talent with great skill sets. And do you feel that you guys just were ahead of the curve on that?
I think later on, when we actually started the wrestling school, that's when it clicked for us. Windy City had an element of what you're talking about exactly. The Iron Sheik was booked on shows against the champion. Ken Patera had come in, and there's nothing disparaging about those guys. Those are the guys we need to learn from. But exactly what you're talking about. We got, we had the tail end of Mr. Electricity, Steve Regal. Hell of a worker.
Oh, yeah.
He'd come in, he lives in Indiana, I want to say, and he would come up and work the champions and give those guys some grooming. And it wasn't until we started the school, and the reason we started the school was, and it's no offense to the guys that trained me, but I knew at that point how to advance. I can train anyone as good as I was trained. I remember all that. Now, here's all the things I've learned, and I need to excel. I want to get to that next level. So we started a school, mainly for our benefit, and then lo and behold, we had some great workers come along and spawn from that place. So, yeah, I will go with that at the later stage that, yeah, we kind of somehow, it's just like anybody, like, oh, that's the future right there. And just like anything that is the future, those old guys, they hated us,
One thing I noticed when you were working in TNA, it basically said, I saw you in a tag team with CM Punk, but you had already helped train some of these guys. Were you having to balance training and wrestling? Were you basically doing both at the same time? How did that work?
Balancing, definitely balancing. By the time I think that TNA thing came along, I think the school had dissolved.
Okay.
Because the school really only lasted about 3 years, I believe. I'd have to really go back and look at time frame. It's gotten more of a stamp of just like the prestige it has, more than than it really lasted. I was actively training guys at probably around that time, or it dissolved. But we would go out on the road. I mean, we were weekend warriors, so anytime we could get work, we were gone. We were going to Minnesota. We're hopping in the car to do that, going to Ring of Honor by that point, I think. If Ring of Honor hadn't come along with, I'd have to look at dates. It was just constant busyness.
Yeah, I went through a similar thing wrestling for Yankee Pro Wrestling. I had one night you'd be wrestling in Worcester, Mass. The next night you're on the Canadian border up in Maine wrestling and trying to get them both done in a double shot for the weekend. And it can get a little tedious.
Sure. Oh, indeed. I don't know what a weekend was. Anytime I'd be home it was, you drove everywhere. So you drove until someone finally started flying you. You drove 6, 12, 15 hours, whatever it was, and you drove back the same night to either catch a booking on the way home or to be home because we all had shoot jobs. So, as Tracy Smothers says, you got to have a job to support your wrestling habit,
One of the highlights of your career for us, and I hate to speak for Dave, but one of the highlights for us is definitely your time in Ring of Honor with the Second City Saints. You guys just clicked and really brought it together, and you were able to have one of my favorite feuds against Dan Moth and
was it BJ Whitmer?
Yeah, BJ Whitmer.
Yeah.
And that feud that you guys had was just absolutely tremendous.
Oh man, what a good time. What a good time. What a blessing in disguise that it was that some real shady stuff went down, which is not good at all. But when Ring of Honor was in bad shape, and that's as far as I'm going to go with it, a lot of things looked to be on the downfall for it, and we were able to pick it back up and keep moving, which that whole time frame gave such a launch for guys like Delirious and Matt Seidel, and there's others I'm going to forget. Well, even Austin Aries and all those guys coming in because they were in the right spot at the right time. Because TNA pulled AJ Styles, they pulled Chris Daniels, I think at the time, and you name it, because they were able to still work TNA and Ring of Honor because Ring of Honor wasn't doing any real TV. It was all tape. Straight to tape or DVD. And Chris Daniels being pulled opened up the prophecy to bring Dan Moss and BJ Whitmer at the forefront with Kathy Carino, or Allison Danger, if you will. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry for that, but I got to cut a promo with Dusty. So
I was going to say, I recognize some Dusty in there. Nothing wrong with that.
If there's anything I regret about my time is that I never got to work with Dusty ever.
Oh, man. I wish that is the only footage I have of anything with Dusty. But he had come down for Harley one time, probably a couple times, but the one time I can recall, he ended up rolling into a battle royal and I was directing traffic. So I'm looking at guys that really don't know what the hell's what. And, I just said what a huge NWA fan I am. And I'm like, okay, guys, you stand there, you take these elbows, and when it's a big one, you take the flip-flop and fly and bump, 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 bump. And the guy who I told to hit record on the video camera just screwed it up. And I gave him hell forever that I don't have that footage,
I think for guys,
stuff.
I think for guys our age, we all had that dream of feeding ourselves to that elbow.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, I still talk about it. I just wish I had a photo of it.
Yeah, those old school. I mean, we're getting off on a different now, but that Dusty promo.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's all right.
Oh,
The
please.
Dusty promos were great. I was talking about when I saw the Cody Dustin match last year. I remember when Cody cut that promo about needing my brother, and immediately before I even saw anything online, I'm thinking about the Iron Anderson was a walk behind her. I don't want you to beg some scum sucking pig to be your partner. And I'm just like getting chills because I hadn't bought into anything like that in a long time. But it was just growing up that fan of that road, those promos, it just hit me back. I'm like, damn it, Cody.
Oh yeah. That was amazing. And you can't find that anymore. I mean, that's another sidestep. That's a missing component of wrestling now. Getting somebody, emotionally invested in stuff. But trailing back to the Ring of Honor stuff with Martha Whitmer, actually, someone just posted on Twitter, a fan from a foreign country tagged me, and it was right where we had a Chicago street fight, which was the culmination of that feud, and we were slamming each other with plastic chairs like idiots. But we did the spot. We were hoping that the spot would occur where we emulate ECW, where the chairs got tossed in the ring, and sure as shit, they followed along as we fed the chairs in the ring, and it was just a beautiful sight to see. Just a beautiful sight to see. What a great end to the feud.
And once again, that's when you know that you've done it right. When you get the audience that vested, whether it's talking old NWA, the night where Ric Flair and the Horsemen chained Dusty into the cage and locked the cage, and they were just attacking the cage, or whether the fans are throwing those chairs in the ring to follow it. When it's done right, it's just such an emotional burst of energy.
Oh, so amazing. So amazing. The end of that, with another great thing, and I post a picture usually every year on Steamboat's birthday, is that Ricky Steamboat was there. He happened to be aligned with the Second City Saints for a while. Saints, sorry. I don't know why I said Stains. Second City Stains. That's awful. Steamboat was back there, and he's watching us put this together. And we know we're going in for a street fight. We know, like, we're popping aspirin, and we're doing exactly what a wrestler does before he's going to bleed. Now we don't bleed anymore, but, we know what to do. And Steamboat's just watching us, and this is not a Ricky Steamboat match. If you can find footage of him bleeding, maybe it's from the Jake DDT, I don't know, probably a couple of Flair matches, but it's not on the norm that Ricky Steamboat bleeds. And I'm pretty sure we did a four-way juice job. When that match was over, he came up to us, and he just looked at us, and I get goosebumps thinking about it. He said, I knew when you guys were talking, you were putting something special together. That was just fucking great. And we were like, we thought Ricky Steamboat was going to shit all over it because, it was just going to be, it's controlled chaos. A good brawl is controlled chaos. Yeah. And it came off. It was so awesome to have that happen and to have Steamboat do that as well.
Yeah, there is something that's an element missing too, I think, a little bit as a fan, is that crazy brawl, the Brody era, and just like those, like even Hanson and Williams. You don't see that physical brawl, people just laying stuff in.
Well, Dave, we were talking about this beforehand, and we were talking about some of the great moments in which you've had in your career. And I think one that has to rise above it all is the haircut from Eugene.
Yeah. We were going to slip that in later, but all right.
I saw an opportunity.
We want to know how did they approach you about that, and what were you thinking at the time, basically?
Sure.
Yeah.
So to give you where I'm at in my career at that point, I'm down living in the middle of Missouri. I'm not sure if I had bought the gym yet. No, I had. I used to own the gym next to Harley Race's wrestling school. Mm-hmm. So I would have been booked out by Harley for Japan. He was my liaison and my agent for so going to Pro Wrestling Noah. But also when the Fed would come around, he'd ask me if I wanted to do tapings. Like, sure, easy money. So I'd go up there, and all I really ever wanted to do was eat food and stay away from everyone. And inevitably, I'd end up wrestling because someone would know me and say, "Hey, put Ace in the match because he can work." Man, damn it, I just want to eat food. What happens this night is everyone that I'm with, and this is, I still have like the surfer hair at this point, everyone that I'm with is bald.
Oh, geez.
Everyone on this, like, they're bald or shaved head, something. I'm the only one with a head of hair. Yeah. Johnny Ace walks up and is like, hey, kid, you want to make an extra $250? I'm like, $500 for what? Well, we need someone to get their hair cut and do that gimmick. Oh, man, really? And so all I can think of at the time is I'm going to piss Harley off. And I want to say I couldn't call him. He was actually in Japan doing something for Noah. Mm. So I couldn't call him up and say, boss man, they want me to cut my hair. And he would, and I'm sure, which comes later to find out, why in the fuck did you do that? Why didn't you tell them no? I'm like, because I didn't want to piss you off or make you look bad. You wouldn't have made me look bad. Fuck them. And I'm like, well, sorry, dude. I cut my hair, and there's pictures of me out there with black, spiky hair for a time. But so I agree. I'm like, screw it. $500. Come on, let's put this together. $500 for a haircut. It's kind of my hair's gonna grow back.
Yeah. I mean, why not?
Right?
Yeah, that's simple business.
We have to.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say we got to give you a compliment here because you're Johnny Ace and your Harley impersonations. Harley. Holy Christ, those are spot on.
Yeah.
I sat next to Harley for 5 years talking to him every day. Anyway, Johnny Ace is kind of an easy one, though. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So, as it goes on for the day, I already know Regal. I've known Regal for probably a year or two at this point, and every time I see him backstage, we'd always bullshit. And he looks at me and goes, Ace, he's like, you're not going to let him do that, are you? And I'm like, cut my hair? Yeah. He's like, but that's like your thing, you know? And I do a terrible British guy. And I'm like, well, sorry, I can't really do Regal. He's just soft-spoken. And I'm like, man, I just told him I don't want to, mess this up. So the funny part about all this is I was a plant in the crowd. So they hand me a ticket, which gives me the seat where I go get picked out of the crowd. So I just sit there and go, fuck, I'm going to lose my hair. So I walk up and I grab a beer. I grab 2 beers and I slug them. And I go down and I sit in my seat. And I'm like, damn it, I got to watch wrestling. I got to watch the dark matches. I got to watch everything until it's my segment. So I just sat there and drank beer until it was time. So they picked me out of the crowd. The other 2 were not plants. They were actual fans in the crowd. They were picked ahead of time, but they had no idea, that I was, they thought I was just a fan as well. Yeah. They had no idea I was a wrestler. Mm-hmm. So a great part about this story is Eugene is doing his gimmick, where he is the quote-unquote special person. Sure. He works it to them, and they believe it.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. So they had never seen Nick Dinsmore before. Wow.
No. And I'm like, that's kind of, if you met Nick, you could, depending on how he feels like working with you that day, just talking to you, you might go, wow, is that part of a shoot? He's just a bit aloof. He's,
That's awesome.
But he works it with these dudes. And they legit turn around after he walks away, and Regal's acting like his handler, like, okay, come on, and walks him away. And these 2 dudes are like, oh man, I didn't realize he was like that. Jeez. And I'm like, wow, we've found it right here. We got some believers. I'm not going to let him in.
That's awesome.
That must have freaked them out when he finally comes to you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was just amazing. Well, they were kayfabe the whole time. Yeah. Even when they were brought to the back, they never knew, I'm sure years later they had to figure it out, I would hope. But for that whole portion that I was around those guys, they were believers. They were believers. Because the one guy's the butler, one guy wears a dress, and of course I'm the haircut guy. See, what else do I remember about that day? Bischoff came up to me and he's like, hey, I understand you have some experience? I said, yeah. He's like, I'm just going to sidekick you right in the chest. I'm like, I got you. And they're like, don't take a wrestling bump. Do your best not to take a traditional bump. So I watched it before. I'm like, yeah, it looks fine. I just fell back. But I was like, yeah, you can blast me. I can take the shot. So what else? The only other memory I have of that is, of course, that I dropped Cabana's shoot name on TV.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I called it, like, Regal knew it, too, because I was trying to pop Regal. And he's like, what's your name? And he goes, well, the first guy, the second guy gets to me, and you, sir. And they're like, haircut. And, the crowd kind of roars because they're looking at my hair. And he goes, and what is your name? And I'm like, Scott Colton. And he knows who that is, too. And he's like, nah. So, good stuff, man. Good stuff. $500 payday to get your haircut.
Nothing wrong with that.
Now, you mentioned Harley, and you did that great impression. And it reminds me of a story I heard recently when Rick had talked about after Harley's passed. And Rick does this story I had never heard about where it talks about Harley's respect. And he's working in the ring with Andre, and Harley suplexes Andre. And Rick talks to him afterwards. He's like, how did you get that spot? And I guess, and I'll do my best race. He goes,
Oh, God.
what do you mean? I said suplex. Which Rick is like, what? And Harley's like, how else would I do it? I called it. And I love that story so much because obviously nobody would just call something like that normally to Andre, I'm assuming, unless you're Harley.
Right.
So, given that story, a little background about Harley, obviously, you worked with Harley so much. Any good stories with Harley? What was it like with Harley?
Harley was awesome. I actually met him. Here's the funny thing about how this all comes about. I trained in Chicago, got a shoot job that moved me to Kansas City for the mid-90s. So basically so I lived there for 5 years, 93 to 98. Over the course of that time, I wrestled in St. Louis, anywhere I could around there. And really the reason I moved back to Chicago to start school was because I didn't have anything. I was 25 years old, and I had no wrestling. There's nothing happening around me. I was doing it once a month, and I'm like, I need to do this all the time. So I happened to work a show in St. Louis, and the local promoter, a guy named Steve Murphy, shout out to Mr. Murphy, who has a bar in St. Louis, if it's still up and running, called Murphy's. He booked Harley. He would book old-timers to come in. Like I got to work Bob Orton Jr. a couple of times, which was just a blessing. But he booked Harley to do commentary, and I popped Harley because I did the spot with the superplex, where you do the superplex, and when you land, the guy who took the bump cradles up, and he actually gets the pin on you. So I did the superplex, but the guy that when we landed it, when I reached back, I cradled back, he cradled me and got the pin. And Harley leans up like, holy shit, you know. And so I met Harley once there, and then not long after that, Dave Marquez went and found Harley to start up the World Legion Wrestling, which became the WLW World League Wrestling. So bottom line is I leave because nothing's happening, and as soon as I leave, within a year, World League Wrestling starts up. I'm like, well, that's some shit for timing. I ended up working for Harley because I wanted to go to Japan, and I worked a couple of shots for him. His crew came up to Illinois on the border. He needed a referee. We had trained a referee, and then I ended up getting on the show, and then he liked my work so much, he said, send me some stuff or I'm going to, start booking you. Well, I start working with him. You may have read this story somewhere, so I'll speak to it fast. Punk told it in the back of a WWF magazine with pictures, only I was omitted from the story. What happens is he gets booked for a show in Milwaukee, Harley does, and I'm trying to get to Japan. I haven't got to Japan yet. I sent my stuff, nothing's happening. I tell the promoter, hey, let me pick him up. I don't mind. I actually had a bum knee at the time, so I could not work. I said, let me go pick Harley if he knows, and I'll cart him around. I got no problem doing this. Who gives a shit? I'm going to hang out with Harley all day. Why not, right? So I pick Harley up. We're BSing the whole day. He actually it's a tournament that night for Mid-American Wrestling, and in this match, he refs Punk and Cabana and actually takes a bump for them in the match. So before the match goes out, he's like, hold these for me. And he gives me all his rings from his giant paw hands that are like one finger is two of my fingers. And I have all these rings on my hand. I look like such an idiot. I'm like, but I am not losing them because it's Harley shit. Match happens, it's over. This place happens to be, it's a volleyball, it's like an indoor volleyball thing, and then the rest of it, like it's half and half, it's a bar. So we go to the bar afterwards, obviously, and start having drinks. I send Harley a shot of the most rot gut whiskey you could ever think of. It is brown. I don't know if some stuff is floating in it. It's got to be awful. I said, give me your worst well shit there is. Send it to him. Tell him it's from Ace. He looks over like somebody says, Ace. I look over and he drinks it, slams it down, and he waves me over, puts his finger up. Come here. You're drinking with me. Ah, shit. What have I done? We proceed to do a few more shots and talk, and then we hash out the whole Japanese thing. He's like, he's like, don't go through anyone else. You're going through me. I said, okay, boss, I gotcha. Wasn't quite my boss yet, but I said, all right, Harley. Well, we get so I'm obliterated. I'm too drunk to drive. I'm not going to. He obviously needs a ride. So I go over to Punk and I go, dude, and Punk and I are roommates at this point. So we're pretty well joined at the hip. We do all kinds of shit together. Not, we're just buds. And I'm like, dude, we drove separately. So I believe we had to drive back to Wisconsin to get my car the next day. So I said, man, Harley wants to go to this hotel. There's no way I'm driving. I can't drive. And, of course, Punk straight edge is like, I got you, bud. Let's go. So we hop into Punk's new Monte Carlo. Brand new Monte Carlo, nice silver. Harley's in the passenger seat. I'm in the back in the middle. Harley's talking to us. And the most god-awful noise comes out of Harley. And we're, like, looking at each other. And then he proceeds to roll the window down. And Punk's like, hey, you want me to stop? He goes, nope. He doesn't let himself throw up. He just spits out the window. He won't. His composure does not change.
Wow.
Boom. Boom. And we're like, I'm hitting Punk. I'm like, I think he's hitting me. This is ridiculous. Go. So fucking gross. But he doesn't move. You guys have surely, everyone's puked in their life.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, whether it be from just a sickness of a virus or you drink too much.
Yeah.
This man is a rock and doesn't move and just spits out the window and goes on with his business.
Oh my God.
So fucking amazing! What a rock this guy was. And the end to that story, which I don't think made the WWF magazine, was the next day Punk goes to, like a detail place to get his car washed, gets it washed, and some kid's wiping it up, and the kid's like, yeah, man, I don't know what that was in that door, but that was pretty hard to get out, but, I did it. And I think Punk handed him like a 20. And he goes, you watch wrestling? And the guy's like, yeah, man, I watch wrestling. He goes, you know who Harley Race is? Oh, yeah, I know who he is. He's like, yeah, that was his puke he just cleaned up. And then hopped in the car and drove away.
That's awesome.
It's good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so we asked you about the haircut. We brought it to Harley. Let's bring it back to another moment. This was the other one I wanted to ask you about. It's the only other one we're going to ask you about that's probably I'm just curious how this came about. For those who don't know, you played Donald Trump in a match against Rosie O'Donnell. How did that come about, and what were you thinking at that time?
Let me state this before I tell you the story. And this is a great story.
Okay.
I spent my life trying to be, just at some point I wanted to be like, Guerrero, Malenko, Benoit, those guys that went to Japan, like that model of a wrestler, right? I changed from a flamboyant guy wearing feathers at some point to a guy that was just, your body's your business in wrestling. So I worked on the frame, and then my look and then my work style just evolved to what it was, being a brawler, being just I just want to be a solid worker and a good hand. There's no mistaking that. Have your fundamentals, have your background, which gets me booked on this day. And I will back this up just a quick sec to say a year prior, Ted DiBiase had seen me work. And at that time, I looked as good as I could look, was working as good as I could work, was going to Japan in and out, doing tours, working for Harley, working everywhere, and I couldn't get signed to save my life. Fast forward about a year, I don't even know if it was quite a year, maybe a year and a half. I'd have to look at dates again. It's been too long. But I get a call from Supernova, Mike Bucci, who I have a good rapport with, and says, hey, Ace, he's like, you'll never guess, it's on Friday, you'll never guess what I have to book for Monday. What do you got? He's like, well, I got to book a fake Rosie against a fake Trump on Monday Night Raw. The show we've been watching since its inception. Yeah. I have to book this match. And I start laughing, and I'm like, and to put it in perspective, this is the height of The Apprentice. The Apprentice is hot on TV, right. And he's got this, and Trump has just called Rosie O'Donnell all these derogatory terms, and they got this big feud happening on TV. It is hot shit. It's, and I laugh, and I go, that's hilarious. I'm like, I play Trump. And he goes, that's why I'm calling you. I said, oh, really? And he goes, do you have a tie? Do you have a suit? I said, no, I don't have any of that shit. And lo and behold, I get everything I need. I show up on Monday night. I show up for Monday Night Raw. Fun fact, Pat Buck, who is now a producer at WWE, he in WrestlePro is where he helps run with Brian Myers. He was the alternate Trump. Like, they had to give two just in case. And Bucci I was like, you had another guy? And he's like, I had to have two. He's like, I knew you were my guy. I told this once on Cabana's podcast a long time ago, but I'll kind of fast forward through the stuff. But that's pretty much it. Like, they walk in, I see Michael Hayes. I've been sitting in catering with a suit on, and Michael Hayes and Shawn Michaels walk in. And it's funny, I never reminded Shawn about this when I was at the PC. I just never brought it up. But he and Michaels walk in. I see them looking around, just stumped. And they're like, what do you think he looks like? And I go, you looking for a Trump? They're like, yep. And I'm like, that's me. And I look nothing like Donald Trump, right? And they're like, oh, well, they're like, they'll put a wig on you and all this stuff. And so we get in the ring and we go over some stuff. And obviously, if you watch it back, the girl who did Rosie looks way more like Rosie than I do a Trump. But I was the mechanic to keep, I was the mechanic to be the glue to get this all together. And think about this. I told the story to the kids in the ring the other day. I said, think about this, guys. We had about 10 minutes on Monday Night Raw. Wrestlers don't get 10 minutes on Monday Night Raw sometimes. That have worked there forever or want it this week. Yeah. Like, there are times when you have to fight. I have 10 minutes on Monday Night Raw to get over the biggest farce that you could put on, where the crowd at the Scott Trade Center in St. Louis is chanting, "We want wrestling," Like, I'm sitting there going, "Oh my God, this is horrid." It's exactly what Vince wanted. It's exactly what Vince wanted. So,
yeah, doing that in St. Louis is like doing that in Chicago or some of the other rabid wrestling cities where they're, oh my God.
Oh yeah. I was just like, oh my God, they hate it. So, which is why at the end, if you watch it, one of the most important parts is when I waffle her with Fudgy the Whale, because if you have good footage of it, you will hear that I cracked. I put it in. Let's just I put it in. I've had the anxiety of, they hate this. Well, I'm going to give them something good, and man, she took a cake.
Sometimes you just got to lay it in good. Now, to speak of something else that's kind of cool, we talked about obviously you teaching earlier on and what it was like for those 3 years maybe that Windy City had the school going. How much different was it to go down and coach in NXT last year and earlier this year, and to go down there and work in the facilities that they have compared to, say, the wrestling schools that we went to when we were coming up?
Well, the world is different now. There's so many advances. I would even go to say, look at the advances in weightlifting. I mean, all of us back in the day just knew how to work out like a bodybuilder. Yeah. That's not functional. That's not functional for anything you do. So, I mean, I never heard of a deadlift until 10 years ago, it's like, I can't do that. My back is awful. Yeah. But things like that. So the advancements in wrestling, I mean, at our school, Windy City didn't train us this way. At our wrestling school, the Steel Domain we had, we would just run drills of drop downs and drop kicks and leapfrogs and things and then wrestle a bit. But there weren't the rolls, there weren't the warm-ups, there weren't the safety precautions taken that I learned at the PC that you take with workers that you train nowadays to keep them functional, keep them that they could wrestle nightly. You have trainers, you have all these things, all these precautions to keep your body healthy, all that you can. It's an amazing place when it's up and running. It's not at the moment. So
yeah, that's warming up for us when we were going through it was running the ropes and taking your basic flat backs to make sure that you were hitting the mat right. That's
sure.
It's incredible the differences.
So one of the things, last things we want to ask you is basically with everything going on in the world now, with COVID, how are you holding up? How are you keeping busy? What's going on these days?
What's going on these days? Holding up just fine. Everybody gets cabin fever. I had cabin fever as well.
Yeah.
I started training over at Pro Wrestling 2.0, which is here in Winter Park, Florida, which is in the Orlando area. Being out and about in the world, I'm wearing a mask like everybody else. I mean, just following the rules. I like to go places. I like to go have a meal and drink a beer. Just now people are 6 foot away from you all around the bar and the eateries and the establishments and stuff like that. Just trying to keep safe. 2.0 is an awesome place. There's a lot of hungry kids there. It's run by a guy named Alex Porteau, who used to be, if you look back in the archives, he was the pug for a short time for WWF.
Oh, yeah.
But he's, he started in the late 80s, so he got a taste of the territories from USWA, Global, and coming down to Florida. He and I actually worked roughly about 20 years ago in the early 2000s, a failed promotion called WXO down here in Florida. But anyway, Alex has a great mind for the business, has always loved wrestling. He just likes to give back and have, a good place for kids to work. we just came in contact together because of mutual people. I ran a seminar. He asked me to come down once a week to train. So it's fulfilling a need for me to like still get in the ring and still give information and work with these kids. You know, and that's a different set of kids as opposed to the PC. Not that they weren't hungry as well. It's just a different set of kids to work with. So it's just awesome. So I'm just staying busy with that, watching film, continue studying. Yeah, that's my life. I just got married recently, which is awesome.
Congrats.
I had a great job. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Florida based now. I've been a Midwest guy my whole life, growing up in Chicago. We moved to Florida when I got the PC gig and started last year. It's just awesome. Just reaping the benefits of life is good.
See, now I've got to ask you a personal question here. Now, you're from Chicago. Are you a baseball fan?
I'm a fair-weathered sports fan altogether, but I know where this is going.
I just need to know Cubs or White Sox.
Cubs always.
See, and the reason why I have to ask that is because we didn't know we have this rivalry. I am a lifelong St. Louis Cardinals fan. Yeah.
Oh, you dirty son of a... Oh. You want the truth is that my wife, Lucy Mendez... God, this is one of the things. This is probably the only thing I can't
tell me
stand
she's a
about her.
Cardinals fan, please.
She's a freaking Cardinals fan, dude. She was trained by Harley. She's actually a wrestler. She was trained by Harley, and she has an affinity for St. Louis. She has the St. Louis. She has the St. Louis tattoo, of course.
And she is an angel because, like I said, I can't even tell you how big of a St. Louis Cardinals fan I am. That's
sounded like she was going to shoot on you too for a minute.
We are big. We are big fans of yours, but we just became bigger fans of your wife.
Son of a bitch.
She got over.
She got over, yeah. Man, always getting over on me. But,
But hey, congratulations. Thank you very much for taking the time for us. Is there anything that we can promote for you that we can bring to the fans?
Yeah, message.
my Twitter and my Instagram are at Aces of Steel, just the way it sounds, Aces of Steel. You can find me on there. Facebook, I don't play with it too much, but there's an Ace Steel and actually Lucy Mendez. She was my valet at one point, or, my manager, my wrestling manager at one point, so we just have it together. But the Aces of Steel, I'm going to start, not only am I doing the training at 2.0, but I'm doing private sessions, coaching sessions with people that want to come in one-on-one and learn a bit more instead of a group setting where, you're not able to focus on someone, so you can get a hold of me either on the Instagram or Twitter or message Pro Wrestling 2.0 in Florida. The other thing, I do have a Pro Wrestling Tee store, so there's Ace Steel shirts out there. I got to think of some new ones. They've been kind of stagnant for a minute. There's some good ones. And I'll throw this out there. Last year, what led up to me being at the PC is I helped co-produce the stunts for the Netflix film The Main Event, which is on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
Very highly rated. It's where the kid finds the magical mask and all that. Mm-hmm. It's great film, great little, it's like Home Alone with wrestling. And I helped put together with the stunt coordinator Lauro Deval, he's got a long name. Lauro Deval Chartrand. It's hard to say. He's got the French name there, but Lash himself, he's a legend. He's a legend in just doing stunts all the way around. He's worked on Walker, Texas Ranger with Chuck Norris. Anyway, he welcomed me in. He and Paul Lazenby, who's another legend, was a stunt double for Stone Cold on a lot of his movies. We put together all the scenes, like the wrestling scenes that are there that you see. So it's a fun movie, so I'll just throw that out.
I got to tell you, that's very impressive. Dave's actually watched it 4 times, which is incredible because he doesn't have children.
Yeah, I'm just weird. Don't worry.
The weirdness comes out. Well, yeah. One of you is weird. One of you is weird, and one of you has shitty sports taste.
Yes.
Yes.
Nice shot. All right, so that wraps us up for this week. Thank you again for listening to the Working Fans Podcast. So as always, you can find us on Twitter at FansWorking. Our Facebook page is Working Fans Wrestling Pod. We have email where you can reach out to us and let us know what you think also. That's workingfanswrestlingpod@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram, workingfanswrestling_pod. And then as always, please continue to listen to us on Anchor.fm, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, all your major platforms. If you're following us on Apple Podcasts, which we are also on now, and YouTube, please make sure you subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. It helps us bring you these podcasts where we get to talk to you and talk with you every week.